Campbell presents the second in a four-part series on the life and work of Elvis Costello. Part 2, Flat Down on the Accelerator.
Oh, I just don't know where to begin.
Suddenly, like, I'd be in the supermarket, and like what were older women to me then, which would be women of my age now, suddenly were sort of coming on to me in the fish fingers, you know, and it was like being Julio Iglesias.
I was worried at the time because I was seeing incest. Can anyone else see these Beatles?
There was this holiday in the middle of nowhere. You know, when we pulled up there, the whole general feeling on the bus was, another group, right.
It was just like you had your foot flat down on the accelerator, just guzzling life down, you know. It was tremendous, really, it was tremendous.
By the early weeks of 1979, Elvis Costello and the Attractions seemed to be locked on course for world stardom. Since their tantalizing unveiling on the Live Stiffs package tour 15 months earlier, they'd seen their collaboration, This Year's Model, zip up the British album chart. And now, their latest release, Armed Forces, was standing at number 2. In America, it was just moving into the top 10. Everything was going to plan.
From the time we went on that Stiff tour, we didn't actually stop touring for 2.5 years. The only time we stopped touring was when we were in the studio. And we didn't actually take anything like a holiday, you know. That was for wimps.
Unlike other British new wave groups, the Attractions were making an impact in America, where saturation touring was the only way to establish a reputation. Drummer Pete Thomas.
We were really confident that it was good. And I think that's when people were still sort of scared of punk or whatever it was. But we were just travelling in a station wagon, you know, and it was all fueled on vodka and long drives every day. It was all like 500-600 mile drives, get to the gig, get drunk, go mad, you know, and he used to go running off over the tables, and, you know, we'd always try and get some sort of incident going, you know. It was a bit like the recording. It was always like a sort of whirlwind. It's like, here we are, way, bang, 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 you know, hammer through the set, and then refuse to do encores, and then people would all riot, and, you know, proper job.
The bass player was Bruce Thomas.
The physical workload of the tours we did, I think, was pretty debilitating. Plus, it obviously didn't help, you know, I don't know whether it helped to drink or not. I mean, I don't know whether you could do anything like that cold. You just had to sort of get through it whatever way you can, you know. So you peak at 11 o'clock at night, it takes you all night, half the night to wind down, and so you have to sleep. You might as well sleep while you're travelling, so you get into this very peculiar cycle. You know, the curse of the minibar hotels, where you get back and just clean the minibar, which means that everybody has drunk 2 Kahlúas, 2 Tia Marias, 2 bourbons, 2 bottles of miniatures of gin, yeah, and so, you know, it's those kind of nights that where things get a bit wild, I think. The first few years I was at home, I think about, I don't know, like a handful of nights, and we did, I think actually Jake went a bit over the top with the old gig list, you know. We'd be on the middle of a sort of a 138-day tour or something, and he'd be wheeling in the gigs for about 4 months in front, you know, and so I was saying, oh, look, I don't want to know, I really don't want to know about this stuff, and but so it's sort of a bit kind of over the top, really. I'll never forgive him for that, never.
Senior Service from Armed Forces, an album that was formulated and shaped on the road.
The range of music that we listened to on the first tours of America, and we had spent a lot of time travelling in station wagons and stuff, you know, for thousands of miles, would be Bowie's 2 great German records, Low and Heroes, Iggy's 2 records that were made at the same time, The Idiot and Lust for Life, ABBA's greatest hits, the original version that had up to about Dancing Queen on it. And then, you know, we'd make up compilation tapes of soul stuff, the Byrds, all that sort of stuff, and Aftermath particularly, and Between the Buttons a little bit, but no other Stones records. And the other stuff that we listened to that didn't show any influence was like country music. Like, I remember even on the Stiff tour, one time when we had a journalist along, Jake came up to me and said, for God's sake, take that George Jones record off, because the journalists will be, you know, they'll read all the significance into it.
Absorbing America through the window of a tour bus, Elvis diligently jotted down images and ideas, some of which would later surface in songs. In Green Shirt, he incorporated the ominous-sounding Quisling Clinic.
Quisling Clinic is a clinic in Madison, Wisconsin. It just sounds good, because of the guy Quisling in the war, it's like, it sounds like, what the hell is that? It's like something out of some 40s kind of Nazi movie, But quite a few of the other ones, just chuck them in, and they go off like little bombs, in the song, They work on the listener's imagination the same way as it worked on yours. A lot of the titles and lines in some of the Armed Forces songs sound almost like song titles themselves, because you get a rather lifeboat mentality when you tour, particularly when you tour at that kind of speed. Whose leg shall we eat first kind of mentality, But I didn't consciously say, well, I'm going to reflect what's coming to me, but you can only write what's in your head. And what was in my head was just a series of jumbled images filtered through travel, drink, drugs, whatever,
There's a smart young woman
The volatile concoction of a strenuous workload, limitless adulation, and the adrenaline rush of success affected the attractions in different ways. But for Elvis, it seemed only to inspire more songs. Nick Lowe.
There was nothing more fantastic to be in an outfit like that, touring American, spoiled rotten, and to be rather successful, but to still be rather an outsider, to feel you were still a kind of an underdog, when in fact you weren't, staying in real good hotels and playing in big places, and they were all full, and people would get outraged, at something which no one would turn a hair at nowadays. People get outraged if they only played half an hour or something, and they zoom off. They'd start ripping the place up and everything. Nowadays, people would just, I don't know what they do. They'd probably be kind of relieved, I suppose. Nowadays, some people just played half an hour. Oh, thank goodness for that. And it just seemed to fuel it. Again, I can remember I was on tour with Rockpile, and we were opening for Elvis, and I remember being in Tucson, Arizona, when he came to my room and said, I've got these couple of tunes, what do you think of this? And one was Party Gun, one was Accidents Will Happen. He brought his guitar to my room, and I couldn't believe it, in the midst of this mayhem that was going on, and it really was mayhem, on those tours, how he could come up with two such wonderful tunes, wonderful, soulful songs like that. It just seemed to be fueling it, and he just seemed to be getting better and better and better and better. And in the midst of this mayhem, I remember distinctly this one occasion, there's plenty of other occasions, but when he brought these two tunes and said, what do you think of these? I said, well, useless. Take them somewhere else. No, I was staggered.
I remember one time we were driving back from a sound check or something. We were stuck on a big, you see those pictures of the huge, 8-lane freeway, and we were stuck in the middle of this, and these two, the archetypal kind of blonde California girls were going along in this convertible, and one of our tracks was on the radio, and it was like something out of a movie, and we're driving along all drunk as lords, all kind of yelling, it's us, and they said, oh yeah, sure it is, suddenly you just had this little bit of a breakthrough. I mean, there was no real hit single or anything in America. It all just seemed to happen from the album as a whole, which maybe made it easier for us over there, in one respect, that it wasn't concentrated on this one song.
In Britain, that one song, Oliver's Army, became a radio favourite, a top 3 single, and one of the most popular records of the year.
Oliver's Army was nearly left off Armed Forces. It was nearly dumped. It was nearly a B-side. And we just had this rhythm track, but we didn't have anything that was holding it together. And Steve said, oh, what about if I do a piano like on Dancing Queen, all these big octave runs and everything, Well, he didn't say all these big octaves, he just went out and did it, and then it sounded like Dancing Queen to us, in our reverie. And that was the thing that made it.
Don't start to talk.
While Elvis was savouring the irony of a song about British imperialism becoming such a bestseller, he was also basking in that satisfying glow of recognition. He was now realising ambitions he'd harboured since his teens. Nick Lowe.
Elvis is someone who's he can come across as somebody who's very conceited, and pleased with himself, but that's not true. He's not. He's a very soulful and a very, very good man. It's just that he's fascinated by himself. He's fascinated by how gifted he is. He is a very gifted person. There's not a question of a doubt about that. Whether you think he's any good or not, or he's to your taste or not, is neither here nor there. But he is, take it from me, he is a very gifted person. And he is almost as if he stands back from himself, and he's fascinated by this gift that he has. And so therefore he's very interested in talking about it, and explaining it to people. And a lot of people who aren't artists can't quite understand that. And that's all it is. He talks about it because he thinks that people are as fascinated by it as he is. It's rather a charming and childlike thing that he's got. So yes, when he started to get successful, yes, he did get kind of dull, because he'd talk about himself, at great lengths, and almost as if he was talking about himself in the third person or something, Isn't this amazing? They've asked me to do this and blah, 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 and then I only went and sang with so-and-so and, some big Tony Bennett or something, I went and sang with Tony Bennett, and he thought I was really good. And to some people that could sound as if it's sort of boasting and showing off and everything. It's not really. It's just because he's literally just so fascinated by this thing that's happened to him.
The downside of wider acceptance was the feeling of futility which sometimes descended.
The tour that gave me the heebie-jeebies was the tour that we were on when Oliver's Army was a hit. That it felt like a barrier had gone up between us and the audience. Before then, it felt like we were all in it together. And then suddenly we seemed like we'd been distanced by this celebrity that had just been visited on us by, I suppose, being on, in more magazines. And it's, you'd play someplace and people would look kind of dumbstruck that you were actually there. And that was a bit bewildering, because previously to that, they'd just been throwing stuff at you and like gobbing at you or whatever, and it had seemed more real, and it suddenly seemed a bit like we were really in show business, and a little bit kind of, I was ready to pack it in, to be honest. I was going to pack it in after that record. Actually Pete Thomas taught me out of it.
Oh, he was always going to pack it in. Oh, he's going to pack it in about 3 times a week on average since the word go, Regularly, it's all over. But I remember saying to him once in the back of the bus when he was on a particularly big one, I remember saying to him, Elvis, you can't give up, because if you give up, all people will have is the Boomtown Rats. And for some reason, it did hit home, that one. Apparently that did do a bit of good, saying that, because it was basically true at the time. He owed it to people not to give up, I don't think he would have done anyway somehow, but he's got an incredible power of bouncing back, Elvis, He'll be really down one day, and then the next day he'll show up and he'll apologise to everyone, and say, right, let's get on with it. Which I've always thought is great, because some people just get themselves in these states and then stay in them, but he's capable of pulling himself out of it and pulling himself together and getting on with it.
Rampaging across America, with records riding high in the charts, the Elvis Costello juggernaut seemed unstoppable, until it hit Columbus, Ohio in the spring of 1979. Pete Thomas.
There was this holiday in the middle of nowhere, when we pulled up there. I can remember driving up in the bus and seeing this other bus in the driveway of the hotel, like another tour bus. And I can remember the whole general feeling on the bus was, another group, right. I definitely remember that sort of feeling. It would be like if sailors came into a harbour and saw another boat there and they knew they were going to have a night off. It would be like, oh, well, we're bound to end up having a punch-up with them. That was definitely a wave of feeling that went through the bus. And then I seem to remember sort of finding out who it was. It's like, oh, it's Steve Stills. It's like, whoa, the old school sort of thing. But it didn't seem unreasonable to us, really, that sort of general you know, it's only sort of like schoolboy sort of sport, really. You know, it's like another group. We can have some sport here.
Bruce Thomas.
I was still doing a bit of myth building, you know, and being objectionable and new wave at the time, you know, and annoying people and being generally punkish, you know, in our attitude. And what started out as sort of good-natured banter, teasing Stephen Stills and so forth, gradually got a slight edge to it, and the edge became a bit sharper and so forth. And he said, well, why are you in America then? We said, oh, we're over here for your women, and we'd just really rather drop a bomb on the place and other things like that. And he said, well, what about American music? You know, you're ripping... I said, no. I said, the Byrds ripped off the Beatles and da-da, you know, and Jimi Hendrix had to come to England before people, and, you know, and the Beatles did Tamla Motown, you know, had to sell you Tamla Motown, and, you know, the Stones had to show you that Willie Dixon was a good songwriter, and so forth and so forth. It went on. And he said, what about, you know, the famous remark, what about Ray Charles and James Brown? At which point he said, well, it's just a pair of jumped up dark gentlemen. At which point all hell broke loose, and Bonnie Bramlett took a swing at Elvis, who was sitting on a bar stool, knocked him off the stool, and actually later found out had succeeded in dislocating his shoulder, so she gave him quite a good whack.
According to Rolling Stone magazine, Elvis referred to Ray Charles as nothing but a blind, ignorant nigger.
I was completely drunk, and I tried to outrage them by making sort of racist remarks. The form that he took was really trying to shock these people by criticizing people who were so beyond criticism that I couldn't believe they couldn't see the irony. Unfortunately, Americans neither share the understanding of irony or sarcasm that I had, and my perception was definitely way off, so there's no excuse for having even brought these words into the conversation. They had the desired effect, which was basically to start a fight, you know, and didn't think anything more of it, really. I just thought it was just about a lot of nonsense. And certain members of I don't know whether Stills or part of that entourage took it on themselves to inform the American liberal press that I was some kind of closet racist. And next thing, you know, we were in deep trouble. We had I don't think quite on the level of the John Lennon's, you know, Beatles are bigger than Jesus thing, but then again, we weren't nearly as successful as them. But it was a comparative kind of freak out, and the radio dropped our record as fast as they could. We had our gig picketed by Rock Against Racism, which was deeply ironic, as they were actually giving out leaflets that, if they had bothered to look inside their own publicity, they would have had pictures of us playing the rally at Brockwell Park in '78, as we were actually, you know. So it started to turn into a bit of a nightmare, you know. I had to do a press conference in New York, which I wasn't particularly well equipped to do at that time. I was pretty wound up. You know, we'd got really in a blinkered mentality, and I wasn't in the best of shape to do it, and didn't make the best job. You know, I think of explaining myself. I had a degree of arrogance about it, because I kind of also knew in my heart that there was an element, particularly of the liberal press in New York, that had been waiting for something to have a go about, you know, because we hadn't really done anything they could criticize, because they didn't really have any criteria. So given this thing, which was perfect for them, they proceeded to, you know, get the wrong end of the stick and beat us around the head with it.
Reverberations from the Columbus faux pas left Elvis facing death threats and widespread media hostility. At one stroke, his standing in America was all but eradicated. Jake Riviera.
It really put a hitch in his get along. That's what it did. Yeah, I wasn't there. These things always happen when the manager isn't available to be consulted. But he was resented. People were hoping for something to, like they do with Prince. You know, most of the if you find exactly the same situation with Prince now, most of the music papers, magazines, because they don't have access to him, resent his talent and his driven workload, and so they're waiting to knock him off his pedestal. And it was the same for Elvis, and it'll be the same for anybody else who's really talented, who comes along, who doesn't want to put up with the bullshit of the music industry. They'll get their comeuppance. We didn't do encores, didn't do interviews. We just came, played a show and left your town. And there wasn't any, gee, great to see you, how you doing, you're fantastic, love you, baby. The trouble is, when you say to journalists, my artist is too talented to talk to you, instead of talking to you in your Columbus Gazette newspaper, he could be writing a song, which is more important in the great scheme of things. They don't like it. In fact, they hate it. and they want to knock you off your pedestal.
With
With little time to recover from the stress and chaos of America, the group hurtled into the sessions for their next record, Get Happy. Jake Riviera.
They chose to do that album in Holland, so I only went over for one day during the whole of that record. By this point, Elvis and the Attractions had decided that they were the Beatles. And they were going to do what they goddamn pleased, just like every group should do. You know, it's their career at the end of the day. It's their prerogative to make as many mistakes as it is forward moves. If your job as a manager is to make sure the artist gets paid a fair fee, if they then go and have a bonfire with the money in the lounge, that's totally up to them.
Once again, Nick Lowe agreed to be producer, packing his suitcase for Amsterdam.
A very, very bad idea. Well, it was just outside Amsterdam, I think. Yes, that was quite an extraordinary time, because it was I remember the studio we were using was extremely sort of Euro. It was like trying to make a record while the Eurovision Song Contest was going on all round you, you know. And there was several other studios in the building, you know, and the other acts seemed so clean cut and with sort of footballer hairstyles, you know. They all looked like ABBA, you know, and yet they'd come and poke their heads around the door. It's very like Bjorn and Benny kind of lookalikes, you know, would turn up and they'd be somebody famous. You know, we were told, oh God, that's Smjörn and Lutje from the Smutjens, you know, and we go, oh, is it? Oh, yeah. Oh, well, very nice to meet you, Smjörn. And they'd come in, and fair dues, you know, they knew there was something going on, but they didn't stay for long. You know, there was something in that room which they didn't care for. So it was a strange atmosphere to make a record like Get Happy in. And I think we ran through about 5 engineers on that, or assistant engineers on that record. They got very upset about the way we were carrying on. It was pretty wild. I'd love to tell you, but I can't remember too clearly about it. But it was pretty wild, because we were all sort of on the road. It was as if when we weren't in the studio doing this stuff, it was just like you had your foot flat down, you know, on the accelerator. It seemed like there was not enough hours in the day, and feet were flat down on the accelerator. And when we weren't recording a record, we were touring and sort of behaving in the same irresponsible fashion on the road. And it just seemed we're just swallowing life down, you know, just guzzling life down, you know. It was tremendous, really, it was tremendous. Everyone was pretty fried doing that record. And there's some fabulous moments on it. There's some awful other moments on it, you know, there's no doubt. But that's the way it was, you know. It was like a snowball, you know, rolling down the side of a snow-covered hill.
Bruce Thomas.
By that time we were pretty far gone on Peruvian hay fever powder and the rest of it, and Pete and I used to stay up for nights on end, you know, and we'd turn up to the studio kind of just gone. And the worst thing was, I remember Steve and I collapsed in a heap over his keyboards when we were doing one song. We were saying, look, play so. He said, I can't play this monkey music anymore. It's an insult to jazz, he said, and fell over his keyboards. And I was worried at the time, because I was seeing I said, can anyone else see these Beatles? And
that was the end of it, really. That was the album when Bruce actually saw Beatles on the floor, and there weren't any. You know, so, there's Beatles on the floor, there's Beatles on the floor. Bruce, there aren't. That old carpet was, you know, moving. I think it was all to do with this sort of Nick Lowe school of most possible excitement in the studio, which can obviously only be taken to a certain level sober, you know, with an early night's sleep, and then gets a lot more interesting, if more erratic, as soon as you introduce substances and things to drink. Mum.
No less than 20 songs were crammed onto Get Happy, and for most of them, Elvis and the Attractions decided on a radical shift from their familiar new wave style. which was now being copied by several imposters.
We just changed direction completely. And I said, well, let's just play these songs as if we were a soul band, as if we were Booker T and the MGs. So it had a particular time frame, the arrangement sense. It was sort of based on Stax and Motown, just around sort of like 65 to 68, but played by these maniacs, you know, so just been, you know, flying around the world for 2 years and going nuts. After Get Happy, that kind of blew the whole thing away of us having to conform to some, you know, 1977 derived musical idea, you know, which in my mind was only a means to an end anyway, as I've already explained.
Elvis's fifth album, his fourth with the Attractions, was Trust.
It was a record that I went off for a little while, mainly because it probably was the low point, you know, physically. It was probably the most dissolute record I personally made. I can't speak for the rest of the group. So I wasn't in great humour at the end of it. I don't think it's the right place to talk about very personal things, but I mean, I did a lot of things which I think were made my first marriage untenable, you know, and therefore, you know, that it was a very fraught time for everybody. But then once I got over my association with the bad time, the record itself actually was surprisingly coherent.
Nick Lowe.
We realised that we'd sort of got a little overexcited. You know, we had to just drag ourselves, as Dave Edmunds says, onto the hard shoulder a little bit, just pull it over a bit. And that was hard because we got used to just steaming through these records, you know, in this glorious... It was almost like it was out of control, really. And yet it would turn out all right, you know. It was out of control. It's a glorious chaos. So we realised that we had to just take ourselves in hand a little bit. So it was a little bit hard. I remember there was a lot of rows doing that. Bruce Thomas has got this lovely old, I don't know if he's still got it, but he used to have this beautiful old Fender bass, this beautiful old pink Fender bass, salmon pink Fender bass. And we used to always talk about an album. It was a two-flight or a three-flight album, which referred to the flight of this Fender bass across the studio, launched by Bruce Thomas, usually towards the head of Pete Thomas. So it was a three-flight album, you know. It was pretty bad. And I think Trust was a kind of a 6 or a 7-flight album.
It was, yeah. And I must say I can add my testimonial to Fender basses being the most robustly constructed instruments ever made, because it's taken a few flights, that guitar. It's still in one piece, yeah.
Bad lovers face to face.
In between his own records, Elvis had produced best-selling albums by the Specials and Squeeze, and he'd seen his songs become hits in the hands of Linda Ronstadt and Dave Edmunds. But neither of the singles from Trust had made any impression on the charts, despite his coming off a run of 9 top 40 entries. His next project, a collection of country songs recorded in Nashville, when country music was about as hip as platform boots and flares, seemed an almost willful act of commercial suicide.
I don't really know why. I just decided to go there. I think the main thing was that as much as I had wanted to escape the limitations of just being like a pop singer who just puts out, like, you only know him by his one song, it suddenly seemed like there wasn't any obvious audience for what we did around 1980-81. Trust came out and it wasn't really a very big success. Get Happy sold half of what Armed Forces sold, and Trust didn't do as well as that. So it was obviously, you know, there was a diminishing audience for what we were doing, and I thought, well, maybe I just could get away from my own self for a while, from the songs, and sing through other people's words, stuff that you felt, you know, that you used to throw the light on the emotional side of what you do. And I made the decision that I wouldn't, as much as not all the band were that keen to do it, I wasn't going to equally go off on my own and have the Nashville Rhythm section, and because then I felt it would just be like going to the fun fair and sticking your head through one of those little cutout things and having your picture taken, you know. It wouldn't really be right. And I thought it could be a good emotional record, you know, good strong feelings, the really good songs. But some of it, believe me, was very real to me when I was doing it, most especially How Much I Lied.
Darling, there is one thing I must say.
Elvis Costello's version of the Graham Parsons song, How Much I Lied. The album Almost Blue was produced by Billy Sherrill, a Nashville veteran more used to working with traditional country stars like Tammy Wynette and Charlie Rich. It all seemed a million miles away from the freewheeling production style of Nick Lowe.
These Nashville people, they talk to one another all the time in this unbelievable code. I mean, they put each other on all the time, you know. Gee, I don't know how you get that sound out of that fiddle, Toad. They look at these names, and they're always hitching up their tackle as well while they're doing that, you know, so that you don't think they're queer or anything. You know, they kind of like, you know, and it's all that sort of, you know, flexing and shuffling and hitching, and it's all going on while they're putting one another on. But they, you know, they are the kings of their castle there, you know, and when he'd carry his gun, you know, he'd be cleaning his gun in the studio and all this. Not threatening you, but they're just, you know, hey, you seen my gun, Snake? He's got an engineer called Snake. And, you know, well, you seen my gun? And suddenly these two guys are like, yeah, no, this is a really good one. This is the pocket model, you know. And I go, oh, God, you know.
Towards the end of 1981, to the surprise of everyone, the new wave's angriest young man made a dramatic return to the charts with an old George Jones tearjerker, Good Year for the Roses.
We had this one very big hit out of the blue in England, nowhere else except maybe Holland, I think that happened. And suddenly, like, I'd be in the supermarket, and like what were older women to me then, which would be women of my age now, suddenly were sort of coming on to me in the Fish Fingers, you know, and because they'd been taken with this record that was sort of romantic. It was kind of odd. It was like being Julio Iglesias.
I can hardly bear the sight of lipstick.
While recording in Nashville, Elvis and the Attractions received an invitation to visit Johnny Cash, whose stepdaughter Carlene Carter was then married to their buddy Nick Lowe.
We were invited as friends of the family up to the Cash house, which was quite a very nice evening. They threw a big kind of dinner for us and everything, and we went up there. And of course it was to the consternation of the Nashville establishment in town, who we should have been invited to, like, it's like being invited to Buckingham Palace, you know. They couldn't imagine the connection, and we were sort of like these rowdy lot that come over from London, you know. That suddenly they're being whisked off in fancy cars to the king of Nashville.
Pete Thomas.
You sort of come to Johnny Cash land, you know, and there's June Carter's railway station gift shop, you know, and then you turn in and pull up to this incredible house on the side of a lake, and he came out with no shoes on, greeted us all, and he said, "How do you like to go and see my Russian hogs?" And like, yes, of course, you know. So he's got this game park, he's got his own game reserve, Johnny, you know. So we got in this van that he just uses for going around his land, you know. And, you know, it's all surreal. It's like, wow. So we drove out to the game reserve, and we all got out of this van, and there was this ostrich standing there. I remember this ostrich. It was like, and Jake sort of walked up to this ostrich. They were about eye level, you know, and Jake sort of looked it in the eye and just went at it like that, and this thing just went and just fixed itself onto Jake's nose, you know. I mean, it was all too fabulous for words. And then it ran off, and then Johnny Cash just threw himself over this fence into this sort of spinney, this muddy spinney, with this bag of fruit, and he had this mango in his hand, and then the next thing there was just this blur, and this enormous hog, you know, with like tusks, you know, a Russian hog that just came out of these bushes, just flew through the air, took half this thing off. I mean, it was like the size of a baby's head, you know, just took half this thing off in midair and sort of vanished again. It was like, and we're all just standing there like, God, Bennett. He says, "Yeah, I brought those little dudes back from Russia under the seat of my Learjet." You know? Russia.
In a way, if I listen to it now, I sort of feel it's like a young Shakespearean actor playing Hamlet before he should. You know what I mean? It was like I was begging the tragedy to come upon me before I was really old enough to wear that kind of grey beard.
BBC Radio 1FM series on Elvis Costello was presented by Nicky Campbell and co-written by Pete Frame and the series producer Kevin Howlett. Next week, part 3. If you can't bop to it, Bombsville.
It didn't matter what kind of haircut we had necessarily. It just mattered if you can't bop to it, Bombsville.